Lakota was 10 years old when his life changed forever. He lived in a small African village hidden between endless grasslands and thick forests where ancient stories were passed from generation to generation. Every evening, elders gathered around fires to tell tales about spirits that walked beneath the moon and forgotten secrets buried deep inside the earth. Lakota loved listening to those stories, but he never believed any of them were real. To him, they were only stories meant to entertain children after sunset. One afternoon, while returning from a distant stream with a container of water balanced on his head, he noticed something strange beneath a gigantic tree that stood alone in the forest. The tree was older than any building in the village. Its roots twisted across the ground like giant snakes. Beneath those roots rested a dark wooden box covered in symbols unlike anything Lakota had ever seen. Curiosity pulled him closer, even though fear whispered for him to stay away. The moment he touched the box, a freezing wind rushed through the forest. Birds exploded into the sky. The leaves above him shook violently. Then the lid slowly opened by itself. Inside the box rested a shining stone no larger than a mango seed. Yet the light coming from it was brighter than moonlight. Lakota stared at it in amazement. The stone seemed alive. Strange patterns moved beneath its surface like tiny rivers of silver fire. He knew he should leave it alone, but something deep inside him urged him to pick it up. The instant his fingers wrapped around the stone, a sharp pain exploded through his body. It felt as if lightning had entered his veins. He collapsed onto the ground, unable to breathe. The forest became completely silent. Not a bird sang. Not an insect moved. Even the wind vanished. Then a voice spoke from nowhere and everywhere at the same time. It sounded ancient and powerful. The voice whispered a warning that chilled Lakota's blood. It said that time would never claim him. It said that while the world changed around him, he would remain exactly as he was. Before Lakota could understand the meaning of those words, darkness swallowed him whole. When Lakota opened his eyes, the sun was setting. For a moment he thought the entire experience had been a dream. He rushed home and tried to forget what had happened. Days turned into weeks, and nothing unusual seemed to occur. Yet small things began to disturb him. Cuts disappeared overnight. Bruises faded within minutes. He never felt tired no matter how hard he worked. During a season when sickness spread through the village and many families stayed indoors, Lakota remained perfectly healthy. People began noticing. His parents laughed when neighbors called him lucky, but Lakota could not ignore the growing unease inside him. Every night he remembered the voice in the forest. Every night he wondered what it meant when it said time would never claim him. He wanted answers, but deep inside he feared discovering the truth. Sometimes ignorance feels safer than knowledge. 10 years passed, then another 10. The village changed. New houses appeared. Old paths disappeared. Children Lakota once played with became adults and started families of their own. Some even had children who were old enough to attend school. Yet Lakota remained exactly the same. His face never changed. His voice never deepened. His body never grew taller. Every morning he looked into water or polished metal and saw the same 10-year-old staring back at him. At first people were amazed. Then they became suspicious. Eventually suspicion turned into fear. Whenever Lakota walked through the marketplace, conversation stopped. Mothers pulled their children closer. Men lowered their voices. Some called him blessed. Others called him cursed. Lakota wanted to scream that he was still the same person he had always been, but nobody listened. They only saw the impossible truth standing before them. The hardest part was watching people disappear from his life. Friends who once laughed beside him grew old. Their hair turned gray. Wrinkles covered their faces. Some became too weak to walk. One by one they vanished from the world, while Lakota remained trapped inside the body of a child. Every farewell felt like a wound that never healed. Every grave reminded him that something was terribly wrong. Years became decades. Decades became generations. New villagers were born who had never known a world without Lakutu. To them he was not a person. He was a mystery, a legend, a frightening story whispered after dark. The loneliness became unbearable. Sometimes he sat alone outside the village and stared at the stars until sunrise, wondering whether he would remain trapped forever while the rest of humanity marched toward a future he could never join. One night, after decades of carrying the burden of his strange existence, Lakuta decided to return to the place where everything had begun. The giant tree still stood in the forest exactly as he remembered it. That alone was unsettling. Trees changed. Forests changed. Entire landscapes changed. Yet this tree seemed untouched by time, just like him. The moon hung high above as he approached its massive roots. The air felt colder than the rest of the forest. Even the sounds of animals seemed distant. As Lakuta searched around the base of the tree, he noticed something that made his heart race. Fresh footprints covered the ground. They had not been there before. Someone else had visited the tree recently. The footprints looked small, almost like those of a child. Lakuta followed them deeper into the darkness. The further he walked, the stranger the forest became. Trees twisted into unnatural shapes. Shadows seemed to move when he was not looking directly at them. Then, without warning, the footprints ended at the edge of a steep cliff. There was nobody there, only darkness below. Just as Lakuta turned to leave, he heard a child's laughter echo from beneath him. The laughter continued, soft at first, then louder. It sounded playful, yet something about it felt deeply wrong. Lakuta carefully climbed down the side of the cliff using roots and rocks for support. At the bottom, he discovered an opening hidden behind hanging vines. A cave. He was certain it had never been there before. Taking a deep breath, he stepped inside. Blue crystals covered the walls, casting an eerie glow across the chamber. Ancient drawings stretched from one end of the cave to the other. Lakuta moved closer and felt his blood run cold. The drawings showed a young boy holding a glowing stone beneath a giant tree. The boy never changed while everyone around him grew older. Generation after generation passed in the drawings. Villages rose and fell. Entire kingdoms appeared and disappeared. Yet the boy remained the same. The final image showed the child standing alone in complete darkness. Lakuta immediately recognized the face in the drawings. It was his own. Someone had recorded his fate long before he was born. As Lakuta explored the chamber, he discovered a wooden table standing in the center of the room. Upon it rested a journal covered in dust. The leather binding was cracked with age, yet the pages remained intact. Curious, he opened it. The very first sentence nearly stopped his heart. It read, "If you are reading this, then you have become what I once became." Lakuta quickly turned the pages. The journal belonged to another child who had discovered the stone centuries earlier. Like Lakuta, he had stopped aging at 10 years old. Like Lakuta, he had spent years searching for answers. Every page described loneliness, fear, and endless wandering. The boy had watched entire civilizations disappear while he remained unchanged. He had searched every corner of the world for a cure but found nothing. Lakuta read for hours. Then he reached the final chapter. Several pages had been violently torn out. Whatever secret the previous boy discovered was gone. A sudden noise shattered the silence. Footsteps, slow, deliberate, echoing through the chamber. Lakuta instantly closed the journal and hid behind a stone pillar. His heart pounded inside his chest. The footsteps grew closer. Whoever was approaching knew exactly where they were going. The sound stopped only a few meters away. Gathering courage, Lakuta peeked around the pillar. The sight before him stole the breath from his lungs. Standing in the doorway was a boy. He looked exactly 10 years old. Not 11, not 12, 10. Every detail matched Lakuta's appearance. The same height, the same eyes, the same face. It was as if he were staring into a living mirror. The stranger smiled calmly, as though this meeting had been expected for a very long time. Then the boy spoke words that filled Lakutu with dread. "You took much longer to find me than I expected." Lakuta stepped out from behind the pillar, unable to believe what he was seeing. His mind searched desperately for a logical explanation, but none existed. The stranger looked too real to be an illusion. For several seconds, neither of them spoke. They simply stared at one another. Finally, Lakuta demanded to know who he was. The boy's smile widened. Instead of answering directly, he walked slowly around the chamber, examining the ancient objects as if he had seen them 1,000 times before. Then he revealed a terrifying truth. He claimed he was the original owner of the journal. He claimed he had found the stone centuries ago. Lakutu immediately rejected the idea. It was impossible. Nobody could survive for centuries. Yet the stranger only laughed. "You know better than anyone that impossible things happen," he said quietly. Those words sent a chill through Lakuta's entire body. The stranger explained that the stone did far more than stop aging. It connected those who touched it to something ancient and powerful, something older than kingdoms, older than history itself. For centuries he had searched for the source of the stone's power. He had crossed deserts, sailed oceans, and explored ruins forgotten by the world. Every clue led him back to the same conclusion. The stone was not created by humans. It came from somewhere else, somewhere beyond ordinary understanding. Lakuta listened carefully, unsure whether to believe him. Yet every detail matched his own experiences. The loneliness, the fear, the endless years without change. The stranger understood everything Lakuta had endured because he had endured it too. For the first time in decades, Lakuta felt something unexpected. He felt less alone, but deep inside, another feeling was growing. Suspicion. Because if this boy truly knew so much, why had he hidden for centuries? Before Lakutu could ask another question, the ground beneath them began to shake. Dust rained from the ceiling. The ancient artifacts rattled violently. A deep roar echoed through the chamber as if something enormous had awakened far below the earth. The stranger's face immediately changed. The confidence vanished. Fear replaced it. That frightened Lakuta more than the earthquake itself. If someone who had survived centuries was afraid, then whatever was coming had to be unimaginably dangerous. The shaking intensified. Cracks spread across the walls. Blue light burst from the crystals inside the cave. Then a deafening sound erupted from beneath the floor. It sounded like a gigantic stone door opening somewhere in the darkness below them. The stranger turned toward Lakutu and whispered 4 words that made his blood freeze. "It finally found us!" Lakuta's heart pounded so hard that it hurt. For decades he had searched for answers, believing that finding the truth would finally free him from his loneliness. Instead, every answer seemed to lead to a greater mystery. The chamber shook violently as ancient dust filled the air. Cracks spread across the walls like spider webs. Some of the priceless artifacts crashed to the floor and shattered into pieces. The stranger grabbed Lakuta's arm and pulled him toward the far side of the chamber. Before they could move far, a deafening roar erupted from beneath the ground. The sound was so powerful that Lakuta fell to his knees. It did not sound like an animal. It did not sound human. It sounded ancient, as though the earth itself had found a voice. For a moment Lakutu closed his eyes. Images flashed through his mind. Villages burning, kingdoms collapsing, countless faces disappearing into history. He did not understand why he was seeing these visions, but every image carried the same terrible feeling. Something had been waiting for centuries, and now it was awake. The stranger led Lakutu through a narrow passage hidden behind a broken shelf. The tunnel twisted deep beneath the cave. As they descended, the air became colder and heavier. Strange whispers echoed around them. Sometimes Lakuta thought he heard his own name. Other times, he heard voices he recognized from long ago. Voices belonging to people who had died many years earlier. The sound brought painful memories rushing back. He remembered childhood friends who had grown old while he remained the same. He remembered elders who once carried him on their shoulders before age bent their backs. He remembered standing beside countless graves while never changing himself. Tears filled his eyes. He had spent so many years pretending to be strong that he had forgotten how much pain he carried inside. Every memory felt fresh because, unlike ordinary people, he had never been allowed to move on. Time healed others. Time never touched him. Eventually, the tunnel opened into a gigantic underground hall. Lakuta froze. Thousands of stone statues filled the chamber from one end to the other. Every statue looked incredibly realistic. Men, women, children, warriors, kings, and travelers stood frozen where they were. Some appeared terrified. Others seemed to be screaming. The stranger's face grew pale. Slowly he walked toward one of the statues and touched its surface. "These were not carved," he whispered. Lakuta stared at him in confusion. Then he noticed something horrifying. The expressions looked too real. The eyes looked too alive. The stranger explained that every statue had once been a living person. People who had searched for the same answers they were searching for now. A wave of fear swept through Lakutu. Suddenly the chamber felt less like a hall and more like a graveyard. A graveyard filled with people who never escaped. As they crossed the hall, Lakuta noticed one statue standing alone near the center of the chamber. Unlike the others, this one looked familiar. His stomach tightened. Slowly he approached it. The closer he got, the harder it became to breathe. The statue was a woman from his village. He recognized her immediately. Many decades ago, she had been one of the few people who treated him kindly after the villagers began fearing him. She had defended him when others whispered about curses. She had shared food with him when he felt completely alone. One day she vanished without explanation. Everyone assumed she had left the village. Now Lakuta knew the truth. She had come searching for him. She had entered this place, and she had never returned. Lakuta placed a trembling hand against the cold stone and broke down in tears. For years, he had wondered why she disappeared. The answer was standing before him all along. The pain in Lakuta's chest became unbearable. He fell to the ground and wept openly. The stranger remained silent, allowing him to grieve. Lakuta realized that everyone he cared about was gone. Not just old, not just far away, gone forever. Entire generations had lived and died while he remained trapped in the same body. He had watched children become grandparents. He had watched villages change beyond recognition. Yet despite all those years, he still carried the heart of a lonely boy. He suddenly understood the true curse. It was not eternal youth. It was eternal loss. Every friendship would eventually end. Every person he loved would eventually disappear. He would remain behind, carrying memories nobody else remembered. The realization crushed him. For the first time in his long life, Lakuta wished he could grow old like everyone else. Before Lakuta could recover, a loud cracking sound echoed through the hall. One of the statues had moved. Both boys instantly turned toward it. Then another statue moved, and another. Small cracks appeared across their stone surfaces. Pieces broke away and fell to the ground. The chamber filled with terrifying noises. Hundreds of statues were beginning to tremble. The stranger's eyes widened with horror. He shouted for Lakuta to run. Massive chunks of stone crashed onto the floor as figures trapped inside the statues slowly began emerging. Some looked confused. Others looked angry. Their eyes glowed with unnatural light. Lakuta's fear returned stronger than ever. He did not know whether these people were victims or monsters. All he knew was that something impossible was happening, and they were standing in the middle of it. The entire hall erupted into chaos. Stone shells shattered everywhere as more figures emerged from their prisons. Their faces carried centuries of suffering. Some cried, some screamed. Others stared into space as if their minds had broken long ago. Lakutu ran beside the stranger while the ground shook beneath them. Behind them, hundreds of awakened figures staggered through the darkness. Then a blinding light suddenly appeared at the far end of the hall. Everyone stopped moving. Even the shaking ceased. Silence swallowed the chamber. From within the light emerged a gigantic shadow far taller than any human. Its outline was unclear, shifting constantly like smoke. Yet one thing was certain. The creature was watching Lakutu, not the stranger, not the awakened figures. Lakutu alone. A cold voice echoed throughout the chamber. After all these centuries, the final child has finally arrived. Lakuta's blood turned cold. Somehow, whatever nightmare had been hunting through history was waiting specifically for him. Lakuta could not move. His legs felt frozen to the ground as the enormous shadow stared directly at him. The hall remained completely silent. Hundreds of awakened figures stood motionless, their eyes fixed upon the creature. Even the stranger beside Lakutu seemed unable to speak. The shadow slowly stretched upward until its head nearly touched the ceiling. Its form shifted constantly, changing shape every few seconds. Sometimes it looked human. Sometimes it resembled a towering beast. Other times it appeared as nothing more than living darkness. Then the creature spoke again. Its voice sounded ancient and heavy with sorrow. It called Lakuta by name. Hearing his name from something that should not have known him sent fear racing through his body. The creature claimed it had watched him since the day he touched the stone beneath the giant tree. It claimed it had witnessed every lonely year of his existence, every tear, every loss, every unanswered question. Lakuta felt as though his entire life had been nothing more than a story being observed from the shadows. The stranger stepped forward and demanded answers. For centuries he had searched for the truth behind the stone, and now the source stood before him. The creature remained silent for several moments before revealing something neither of them expected. It explained that the stone was never meant to be found by humans. Long ago it belonged to a power older than the world itself. When fragments of that power fell into the earth, they became the glowing stones. Anyone who touched one became disconnected from time. They would continue living while the rest of the world moved forward without them. The creature described it not as a gift, but as a mistake. A terrible accident that had trapped countless souls between one moment and the next. Lakuta listened carefully. For years he had dreamed of understanding his curse. Yet hearing the explanation brought no comfort. Instead, it made him feel smaller than ever. His suffering had not been part of some grand destiny. It had happened because of an ancient mistake. A deep sadness settled over Lakutu. For so long he had hoped there was a purpose behind his endless youth. He wanted to believe his pain meant something. He wanted to believe all the years of loneliness were leading toward a greater reason. Instead, he learned that his suffering might have been meaningless. The realization struck harder than any physical wound. Tears filled his eyes once more. He remembered every friend he had buried, every family member he had lost, every farewell that had carved another scar into his heart. If all of that happened because of an accident, then the universe seemed far crueler than he had ever imagined. The shadow watched him quietly. For the first time, Lakuta noticed sadness within the creature's voice as well. It almost sounded guilty, as though it regretted what had happened to him. Yet regret could not return the years he had lost. Regret could not bring back the people he loved. The stranger suddenly asked the question Lakuta had been afraid to speak aloud. Was there a way to break the curse? The hall grew silent once again. The shadow lowered its head. For several long moments it did not answer. Then it finally revealed the truth. Yes, there was a way, but the cost was terrible. Anyone freed from the stone's influence would immediately receive all the years that had been stolen from them. A person who should have been 80 would become 80. A person who should have been hundreds of years old would age instantly. The stranger staggered backward as the meaning became clear. If the curse were removed, centuries would crash down upon him in a single moment. He would not survive. Lakuta felt his chest tighten. For the first time in decades, freedom seemed possible. Yet freedom came with a terrifying price. The stranger began laughing. At first the laughter sounded normal. Then it grew louder and louder until it echoed throughout the chamber. Lakuta stared at him in confusion. Finally the stranger admitted the truth. He had not spent centuries searching for a cure. He had spent centuries searching for a way to survive the cure. He was terrified of death, more terrified than anyone Lakuta had ever met. The thought of finally growing old filled him with horror. For hundreds of years he had convinced himself that endless life was better than any alternative. Yet now, standing face to face with freedom, he could not accept it. His laughter slowly turned into tears. Lakuta watched in silence. For the first time he understood how deeply fear had consumed the other boy. Endless life had not made him stronger. It had only made him afraid of losing it. Suddenly the stranger's expression changed. Desperation appeared in his eyes. He turned toward the shadow and demanded another solution. He begged for more time, more years, another chance. The creature remained silent. When no answer came, anger replaced his fear. He accused the shadow of ruining countless lives. He accused it of abandoning those trapped by the stones. His voice echoed through the hall. The awakened figures watched nervously as his rage grew stronger. Lakuta understood the pain behind those words. The stranger had carried centuries of loneliness, centuries of grief, centuries of fear. Now all those emotions were exploding at once. The hall felt like a storm moments before lightning strikes. Something terrible was about to happen. Without warning, the stranger lunged toward the shadow. A blinding wave of silver light erupted from the stone he carried. The force shook the entire hall. Cracks spread across the floor. Statues collapsed. The awakened figures screamed and scattered. Lakuta shielded his eyes as energy flashed through the darkness. The stranger had finally broken. After centuries of suffering, fear, and loneliness, he refused to accept the truth. He would rather destroy everything than face the end of his endless life. The shadow raised one enormous hand. Light and darkness collided in a deafening explosion. The blast hurled Lakuta across the chamber. He crashed against the floor and struggled to breathe. Through blurred vision, he watched the battle unfold. It looked less like a fight and more like two ancient forces tearing reality apart. As the battle raged, pieces of the ceiling began falling. Massive rocks crashed into the hall. The entire underground world was collapsing. Lakuta forced himself to stand despite the pain. He realized that if nothing changed, everyone inside would die. The awakened figures were trapped. Some cried for help. Others searched desperately for an escape. Lakuta looked around at the frightened faces. Most had spent years imprisoned within stone. Some had lost entire lifetimes. Yet even after everything they endured, they still wanted to live. Their determination struck something deep inside him. For so long he had focused only on his own suffering. Now he saw countless others carrying burdens just as heavy. The realization gave him strength. For the first time in many years, Lakuta stopped thinking only about himself. Gathering every ounce of courage he possessed, Lakuta stepped between the shadow and the stranger. The energy surrounding them nearly knocked him off his feet. Both turned toward him in surprise. Lakuta's voice trembled, but he forced himself to speak. He said he was tired. Tired of fear. Tired of loneliness. Tired of running from the truth. He admitted that growing old frightened him too. He admitted that death terrified him. But he had spent so many years watching others live complete lives that he finally understood something important. The value of life came from its ending. People cherish moments because those moments could not last forever. Endless life had stolen that meaning from him. Tears streamed down his face as he spoke. Every word carried decades of pain. The hall fell silent once more. Even the collapsing ceiling seemed to pause. The stranger stared at Lakutu with disbelief. For centuries, he had searched desperately for a way to avoid death. Yet here stood someone willing to face it. Slowly the rage drained from his face. The silver light surrounding him weakened. The shadow lowered his hand. For the first time since arriving in the hall, peace seemed possible. Then the creature revealed one final truth. The curse could only be broken if someone willingly chose to release it. No force could remove it. No battle could destroy it. The choice had always belonged to those carrying the stone. Lakuta looked down at the glowing object in his hand. The answer he had searched for across decades now rested within his grasp. One decision would determine everything. Freedom or eternity.